Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you where we're still, I think there's still like 10. We were talking about it on the last episode, Chad. I think there's still like 10 bills that the governor, and I expect either today or Monday, we're probably going to get his decisions on those final 10 bills. So technically the legislative session isn't quite over yet, but we're getting there. And we wanted to talk a little bit and kind of do an end of session wrap up. There were some big debates during this session. Here to talk with us about some of those is Senate Majority Leader David Hogue, of course, Republican from Minot. Senator Hogue, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Glad to be home. Not stuck in Bismarck anymore.
Yeah. I'm actually, we were talking about the rain before we came on, and I'm just really, I'm as excited about it as most of the people in the West are, particularly those in the ag community. This has been, I don't know what you call it, $1 million rain is certainly one of those events. It's having a large impact on a lot of people in Western North Dakota for sure.
Were you a dummy like me and forget to turn your sprinklers off during it?
I live a couple of miles out in the country. I don't have sprinklers, but I did mow my lawn once, and it was like I was in the middle of a dust bowl for an hour as it was dusty in early May.
Yeah, and I want to go on the record and say I did turn off my sprinklers as to not waste our precious water resources on Lake Rockport.
Yeah. Well, I didn't do it on purpose. I forgot that they were still on, and I woke up at 6 this morning to the sound of my sprinklers going off outside my window, and I'm thinking, you idiot. And that was totally not needed. So, Senator, I wanted to ask you, first of all, the big debate of this session, probably maybe the most high-profile piece of policy that came out was the property tax bill.
Sure.
And you were pretty central to the debate over that. And one thing that you were really adamant about was the skin in the game provision to ensure that, or I guess basically put a sort of cap on how much of the property tax credit people could receive. That ultimately wasn't a part of the final bill. How satisfied are you with what the legislature did ultimately?
Well, I'm extraordinarily satisfied. I couldn't be happier. If we, the skin in the game amendment that you reference is a pretty small piece of the overall package. It's potentially a $21 million fiscal impact, but you have to look at the bigger picture. And I think the bigger picture, both from this session and the last session, is that under Leader LaFour's leadership and mine, we passed over $950 million of sustainable income and property tax relief for the people in North Dakota, and that's the big picture. I've looked around what Texas has tried to do with the primary residence tax credit. What Minnesota did last session when they had a surplus. They don't have a surplus this session, so guess what? No tax relief. Montana, the same thing. They are trying some income tax relief, but nobody, whether you measured it on a per capita basis, whether you measure it on, a percentage of your surplus that you gave back to the taxpayer, nobody in the nation is doing what North Dakota is doing. And so I'm really proud of that. So that's the big picture. The skin in the game was, that was one of probably 6 different levers or things that we were looking at to figure out how to deliver property tax relief. I think the biggest issue that probably went unreported was how many people are eligible for the primary residence tax credit and how many are going to claim it. And there was a big difference between the tax commissioner, the Senate, and the House about that number. Because the tax commissioner was stuck around 160,000 homes, and in the Senate we were right around 144,000 homes. Well, if you do that math, that's 16,000 primary residence applications times 2 in a biennium. That's 32,000 homes times a $1,500 or $1,600 tax credit. Well, that's a $50 million item of difference that you're trying to factor into the amount of tax relief. And so that was probably the biggest one.
Do you feel like ultimately we got that math right?
I don't because there's so many unknowns that we don't know about. We know we have approximately 16,000 mobile homes out there. We don't know how many of them are actually applying for the credit. But based on what we did on the $500 tax credit, we think it's a pretty small number because the amount of credit that they would actually get is in that $200 to $400 range. And so I, at the end of the session, thought maybe we should set some additional dollars aside for the tax commissioner because we think we're going to be a little low. But I think the prevailing sentiment was that the tax commissioner will ask for a deficiency appropriation. And by the time we come into the 2027 session, we'll have a better feel what that number is going to be. But the reporting is that it was $407 million worth of tax relief. I think it's going to be closer to $440 million.
Senator, what were your thoughts? I mean, when the bill went over to the House, your fellow Minot Republican, Scott Lauser, stood up and talked about how he supported the bill, but then also sort of announced a constitutional measure on property taxes as your former colleague Rick Becker was up in the crowd videotaping him. I mean, the yes on Measure 4 crowd is still out there saying not enough was done, not enough was done. What's your take on all this? I mean, do you think they're going to try another measure? I mean, I can't imagine there's going to be enough wind behind them to, I mean, if I'm getting $1,600 off of my property taxes, I'm a little less angry about my property taxes a year from now than I am today.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. And I like to say, and maybe it's a little bit, I like to say I try to pay attention to the people who are in the arena with me trying to formulate policy and not those, the Monday morning quarterbacks are always going to be there. But the reality is we have 53 counties and Measure 4 failed in all 53 of those counties. And so, when people talk about, well, this is what the people want, who are the people? Because certainly when they were given the opportunity to abolish property taxes, they said no, and it was pretty overwhelming. So, I try to focus on what makes sense and what is affordable and sustainable so that the next legislature does not have to sort of take back what they've previously provided. And so I just try to stay focused on that. You're always going to have that element of the Monday morning quarterbacks that always think you can do better. But I try to remind my caucus at least that they are the loud minority that it has access to social media and other things to really project a voice that doesn't represent the majority.
I think that's been one of the great challenges of policymaking in this era is the degree to which social media can act, social media and perhaps other media can act as a distortion field for the public where, a lot of time, I mean, sometimes people get a lot of traction on social media and they can turn that into real impact politically. They get people out at endorsing conventions or they get people out at the ballot box. Sometimes that can happen, but sometimes it can't. And sometimes it can be hard to tell what's a genuine movement and what's not. I think your analysis of the Measure 4 folks is correct. Even back, this last cycle before we had done anything on property tax relief, and I would say that public angst with property taxes was high, they still didn't do very well at the ballot. Now we have, there's a lot of North Dakotans who are going to be receiving a substantial amount of property tax relief. That is going to change the political calculus and not in their favor. So,
right.
I think your analysis of that is correct. Another big thing that is right at the end of the session, a big fight over campaign finance reform. And this, of course, is something near and dear to my heart as I love reading campaign finance disclosures. But big differences between obviously a majority in the House and the Senate on, what lawmakers in particular should be reporting. The Senate's position essentially is that legislators like other, like statewide candidates, for instance, should be itemizing, campaign expenditures. It should be reporting beginning and ending fund balances. Were you surprised at like, how kind of, because it all started with Senator Sean Cleary's bill, and obviously it took a very, very convoluted path through the legislature. But, when I first read it, I didn't think it was that controversial, and it got very heated at the
It
end. Did
did.
that surprise you?
It did surprise me because, it's one of those little, I don't want to call it a sleepy little issue, but it wasn't particularly on my radar as things we needed to resolve to get the session wound down and get us on the road to, or at least getting us able to hear the gavel sine die us out. And I was very surprised. Um, and so I think part of it was that I didn't have a great realization that how dug in both sides were, the conferees on both sides, and wanting, seeing it as a great philosophical divide, which there often are divides between the House and Senate that I think sometimes the public doesn't necessarily appreciate. But yeah, I was surprised.
Senator, one thing that the state has been facing for, it seems like decades, is workforce issues. You and Representative LaFleur had an op-ed about the accomplishments of the session. I got to be honest, the piece on workforce seemed a little thin. Can you talk about what the legislature did in terms of workforce and getting more folks into the jobs and filling the positions we need to fill in the state?
Well, okay, happy to do so. One of the things that I hope that will take off is we offered an employer child care tax credit. Hate to use the term "skin in the game" there, but I will. It's nice.
Careful, that's a phrase that you can never use again.
I almost think gave him a dirty word by the end of the session.
No, but I mean, how do you incent employers to participate in sharing some of the cost of childcare, which we know is a huge barrier to getting people into the workforce, particularly for entry-level positions, the retail, restaurants, lodging. We know those people tend to stay out of that workforce because of the lack of affordability of childcare. So one of the things we did is we passed a credit that I think will be, useful to the large employers, because they're the ones that will pay state income tax. And so I'm hopeful that will catch on, and people say, "Hey, here's a way for me to help myself through a tax credit, and also help my employees that they're looking at their take-home pay and how much goes to childcare, and they're really questioning, how can they make that work." So that would be an example of something that we did to improve on the affordability of childcare and getting people into the workforce.
Do you think that some of it, because the workforce issues, we've been debating them for decades, and we've tried a lot of things, over the years. And I mean, I got the sense kind of, and I shared Chad, like I'm a little underwhelmed, but I think I'm also a little sympathetic too, because I'm thinking it's hard to know what else to try at this point. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss. I don't know how to solve it either. I don't know how to make people want to move to North Dakota and live in North Dakota. And I say that, like, I love North Dakota, but that's been a major challenge, is how to get available. We've tried everything, higher ed, trying to incentivize students to stay, trying to incentivize workers to move here. I mean, short of just cutting people checks to move to North Dakota, do you feel like we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel for ideas?
Well, no, I don't. I guess what you mentioned, okay, higher education. I've kind of changed my thinking on that over the years, because we know we subsidize every student from out of state that comes to our out of state universities. We subsidize every one of them, and by a significant margin. And so, but I've come to realize that actually works. It's money well spent when you are able to get a young student from Minnesota that comes either to, primarily NDSU and UND, they get a chance to be on campus and to develop an educational career. The probability that they're going to stay in North Dakota increases dramatically, because we know, the people that do come here to stay, they're either come here because of a job, because they're going to school, or because they have some, familial relationship that draws them here. And that's to me what we have to focus on: education, existing jobs, and those family relationships. And that's what we should be leveraging. And when we find something that doesn't work, as an example, the Find the Good Life program that was inside of Commerce, the North Dakota Senate, we didn't just reduce the funding for that. We eliminated that because we thought that the program isn't working because it's based on a faulty assumption that you'll be watching your TV one day and you'll see an ad and you'll want to move to North Dakota. We know that's not good policy.
Senator Hogue.
I'm sorry, just a quick follow up. And I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but my thinking about, sort of bringing in, incentivizing out of state students to move to here, North Dakota, to get their education and hopefully put down some roots and stay. But one complicating factor is kind of the move towards distance education. Are you worried? I mean, because that whole premise is assumed that we're going to get them on a campus in North Dakota, but we're very much moving towards distance education, and we're seeing a lot of distance education where North Dakota taxpayers are kind of paying for distance education for people in other states. And that worries me a little bit because in those instances, we don't have the incentive where we're bringing them physically to North Dakota to put down roots. Does that part of it worry you at all?
I absolutely agree 100%. And that's why we're changing that formula. Because if under the higher education funding formula, we were incenting institutions to get students and get them to earn credit hours, and that's how they received revenue. And we're gonna revise that, because we absolutely do not want to subsidize remote education students that have no likelihood of coming to North Dakota. And so we have an interim study that's going to look at that and change the formula to say, not only is it, we want to reward the universities that actually bring students inside the state of North Dakota. They can still do their distance education, but they're not going to be economically rewarded the way the so-called butts in the seat students are.
Senator, staying on education, Rob got to talk about campaign finances being very close to his heart, so now I'm going to talk about K through 12 education. Again, looking at your op-ed, it referenced this session was about results, not rhetoric. And then when talking about education, the first line was, we increased teacher pay.
Yep.
And then at the end of it, it said, to support educators, we introduced signing bonuses for new teachers, House Bill 1498. That was already in code. All you did was change the way, like, it cleaned up language, and then also modernize the process for a lifetime teacher license. So my question for you, we just saw reports that we're continuing to go down in the national rankings of teacher salary. You said you raised teacher salaries. What did the North Dakota legislature do to raise teacher salaries?
Well, we increased, we had a debate about that, Chad. We increased the per pupil funding 2.5%. And I will say that involved a lot of back channel debate, because, we weren't raising providers, the people that provide support to the people who are not able to take care of themselves in the Health and Human Services budget. We weren't giving them a 2.5% increases, but we were doing that for teachers through the per pupil funding increase. So,
but you understand that the 2.5% is below inflation, and also all that money doesn't go to teachers. That goes to the district to pay for health insurance and all the other rising costs as well. So to say they're getting 2.5% is exactly accurate.
Well, I get that, but it's more than we gave other providers. And I think that's a reasonable assertion to say that when you raise the per pupil, you are signaling that you'd like to see teachers. We realize that's a local decision, but we certainly put the dollars in there that if a school board was so inclined, they could raise student or teacher pay 2.5% as well.
How likely are we? We're certainly seeing a lot at the federal level. We've recently had Congresswoman Julie Fedorchak on, talking about, the work they're trying to do. And she's pretty adamant that, and I agree with her that we've got to right size the federal government, but that's going to mean cutting some spending, and we can have a debate about what's good spending and what's not spending. And we're probably going to have 3 different point of views depending on what it is.
Right.
But I mean, obviously, if some of that federal money, and we saw it already, where we saw some FEMA money dry up for some water/sewage projects around the state, is the legislature anticipating more? How likely is it, do you think, that we end up with a special session sometime in the next 2 years before the next session to come in and address, changes that the federal government's making to North Dakota's cut of federal spending?
Well, I think the probability is moderate to low that we would come into a special session to address federal funding cuts. What has got my attention is, the major piece of change that you're seeing at the federal level, at least what's being talked about in the national media, is changing the eligibility requirements for Medicaid recipients, and I think it involves them having to, apply for work and other eligibility criterias. I don't think that would have a big impact in North Dakota. That's why I say even if they pass something like that, I don't think we would call ourselves into session to deal with that rather than wait for the next session. But if there were some major losses, there, like I've said before, there are 4 or 5 different scenarios where we would call ourselves into session. One of them that I pointed out was, if the Eighth Circuit decided to reverse the lower court, which they did a couple days ago. I mean, I'm receiving calls to do that, but I don't know about that one. The second would be a catastrophic decline in the price or production of oil and natural gas, because that would throw our budget projections way out. The third is, federal reductions, like we saw with the Lincoln sewage lagoon, the one in Pheasanton, and I think the one in Washburn. So I was happy that they announced that withdrawal of funding so that we could respond to those.
So, Senator, as Rob mentioned at the beginning of this, the governor still does have 10 budget bills or so that he could do some line item vetoing. I mean, is there if he line item vetoes, do you have the ability to come back and try to override those vetoes? And do you think, how significant would the vetoes have to be for you guys to want to come back to override them? Or do you come back regardless to try to override them?
That's a good question, Chad. It does fall on, what is the significance of the veto? One of the great powers that the governor has is that so-called line item veto, meaning that he can look at a budget, and it could be a budget as large as the Department of Health and Human Service, right? $5.5 billion, and he can say, well, I'm not going to veto the entire budget and create that severe of a veto, but I can go in and say I don't like this particular line of spending, and he can do that. And with any given budget, there are 15 or 20 different discretionary spending items that he can veto, and I suspect he will want to veto some because I know most of the budgets the legislature is working with the Department of OMB on those budgets. But if there's something the governor doesn't like, he has that prerogative, and I suspect we will see 1 or 2 of those. But a particular line item is not going to cause us to come into session.
But you and Representative LaFleur would sit down and just sort of make that determination.
We would.
So is it made by the leaders then? You and your counterpart in the House make a decision for the whole chamber, or how does that work?
It's up to the legislative management, which is 17 members, of which Leader LaFleur and I are 2 members, make the decision on whether to come into special session. And, it's one of those things where you do the analysis. How significant is it? Is it something that, even if it's broke, can it not wait until January of 2027? And so that's the sort of the analysis we go through. But there's not many things that are of that significance that we're gonna come back into session to fix.
Right. And you want to make sure you have the votes to override it. You don't want to come back just for the sake of coming back.
Yeah, no, that's a really bad look for the legislature, where we say we're coming back to override the governor's veto
and then fail.
Votes.
You better whip that vote if you're going to do it. No. You better have the whip count in correctly. Do you anticipate any vetoes at this point, or it's kind of a guessing game? I mean, the only person who knows is the governor and his staff. But any that stick out to you that might be drawing his eye?
I wouldn't want to comment on that. That's, like I said, that's the governor's prerogative. It's something that's accorded to him under the Constitution. And I don't want to be casting any stones at this point.
Any other victories or accomplishments that you want to highlight that took place this session? I mean, it seems like the Jamestown State Hospital is a big deal. The governor's been touting the cell phone ban. I'm really interested in how that implementation is going to work. But anything else that you want to sort of point to as accomplishments from this legislature?
Yeah, well, thanks, Chad. You highlighted a couple. I would point out one other one, which was part of the, again, not widely reported on the property tax reform and relief debate, is, our rural legislators were interested in seeing more funding for rural infrastructure, but they were also interested in seeing that funding source be something that isn't flat and static like our gasoline tax. And so in addition to using the legacy fund earnings to fund the primary residence tax credit, we also tied 2% of those legacy fund earnings to go into the DOT budget, and specifically to fund rural infrastructure, county roads, bridges. And so that, I think, represents a significant win for the rural parts of our state who are under the belief that we're not adequately funding rural infrastructure. And in order to do so, we need a source of revenue that has the ability to grow over biennia.
And that's really interesting. And it's probably it's a part of it. It's not a sexy part of the legislative debates that happen, but it's a necessary one when you think how vital, some of those long back, dirt roads maybe don't get a lot of traffic, but when you think about the commerce that they bring, the crops that they're bringing to market, or the industry that's back there servicing oil wells or what have you, it's pretty important. Not to mention, obviously, the people who live out there who deserve good roads and all that as well. Senator Hogue, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.